Hello, friends, and welcome to the season 6 of the Little Woman podcast. I can't believe I've been doing this for 6 years. That's crazy. And I was in the uni when I started. Today's comment shout out goes to Carol, who says, quote, I seriously look forwards to the day when a true fan of the book and what is in it will make an adaptation that is honest and respectful to the actual story and Louis' vision. End quote. Oh, Carol, I am waiting for that too. I was in a pretty bad place mentally last year. Way too much drama. Let's hope that this year is going to be better. I'm currently writing a book about this podcast. It is going to have the transcripts of the first 5 seasons. If you guys have any name suggestions, you can email me, and you can find all my contact info from the description. You can also send episode suggestions to me. If there are some particular things you would like me to talk about, we will go through all the chapters at some point, so no need to send chapter suggestions. They will all be handled. But suggestions about other themes related to Little Woman are welcome if you have something in your mind. After Little Woman, we will go through Little Men and then Joe's Boys. So I am not going to run out of material anytime soon. Okay, let's talk about today's guest. My guest is Jenne Bergstrom. I first met Jenne in Louisa May Alcott discussion group about 5 years ago, shortly after her book, The Little Woman Cookbook, was published. I am thrilled to have her on the podcast. Jenne is the author of The Little Woman Cookbook, which she co-wrote with Miko Osada. As a librarian, Jenne is passionate about both cooking and literature. I truly enjoyed this book, even if someone isn't particularly interested in cooking. It is still an enjoyable read. It includes fascinating bits of information about food in Little Woman and the culinary arts of the 19th century. I will add a link to the book to the description as well. And you can find my Little Woman podcast transcripts from Amazon. And feel free to join my free newsletter at littlewomanchannel.substack.com. And in this episode, Jenne and I will be discussing the Little Woman Cookbook, and we will be dissecting the chapter Domestic Experiences. This is the Little Woman podcast and Food in Little Woman. Enjoy!
We started writing blog posts about literary foods. Both of us are librarians and we love to eat. We started out by making a recipe from one of Roald Dahl's books. It was the meat pie from Jenne, the champion of the world. And we just kind of did this for the fun of it. And we were like, this is amazing. We need to do more of this. So we started just, making other dishes from books that we both loved. One of the books that we both loved and grew up with was Little Women. And so we made a number of different dishes from that. A lot of them were from Joe's Disastrous Dinner Party, which I believe you've already talked about on the podcast. And so we were just kind of going about our business, doing this for the fun of it. And one day we got a message through our Facebook page from editor at Ulysses Press saying, we're interested in doing a Little Women cookbook. This was when the latest Little Women movie was coming out. And she wanted to know if we would be interested in being the writers of this cookbook. And so we were both like, well, this is a weird scam. It seems very niche, but we're like, clearly nobody would ask us to write a book over Facebook. But we, got in touch with her. We thought, why not? Let's investigate this. And it turned out it was actually a real thing. And so we were like, well, gosh, we don't know if we know how to write a cookbook. But we thought about it. We thought, well, we've done a lot of historical recipes. We are librarians. We're good at research. And we love Little Women. And we quote it to each other all the time. So we're like, well, if not us, then who? Right? So, and it worked out.
That's awesome. I think they are getting quite popular because when I went to Amazon, there were Pride and Prejudice cookbook and of Green Gables. Like I told you, there was a cookbook released here in Finland about cakes inspired by books. A niche that is becoming very popular now.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it has been, for a long time. I mean, there are a lot of literary cookbooks, that have come out in the last, say, 30 years, probably, if not earlier. It's certainly wasn't an original idea by us. And there are lots of other food blogs like this. That's the other reason why we were surprised by this, because it's like not like our blog is at all popular really in any sense, and we probably have like a few hundred viewers a month or something like that. So it was amazing that they even found us, but I guess not that many people had actually been cooking Little Women recipes. So we have a whole collection of other literary cookbooks, and we would really love to do an Anne of Green Gables cookbook, because that's another one of our favorites. But there already is one that is actually written by, I think, a niece of L.M. Montgomery. So we're kind of like, well, we can't really go into that space, as it were.
There's always room for more, or you can go find a special niche for that.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, if you go on our blog, Miko has put together a whole list of all of the dishes that she would like to do if we ever did that. So that was actually, I think, maybe, was that the first one? Or maybe it was Harry Potter, but Miko has this hobby, I suppose, of making food concordances from books, where she'll read through an entire series of books and she'll write down like every mention of food and, who cooked the food and what time of year it was in the story and all of that. You can find a number of those on our website. Miko really loves to do that kind of like really detail-oriented type of work. I am not that person at all. She is the researcher in the partnership, and I am more of the cook in the partnership.
Nice. I got your cookbook last month, and I've done 2 recipes from it. I made Marmie's omelette, and then I made Meg's lamb chops for John. But I'm a vegetarian, so I had to replace the lamb with tofu. But it came out really good.
Oh, good. What did you think about the recipes? Did the process make sense? Like, was the result what you imagined?
They were really good. I was worried if I could find all the ingredients from here, but it was fine. Like, there wasn't really anything I had to replace except the meat.
Sure. Curry?
Yes, the curry lamb. I think here in Finland, especially like this time of the year, in the summer, we get lots of like fresh vegetables, but sometimes they're actually really hard to get in the winter time here. I need to plan my cooking ahead.
That's what they did at that time. And that's partly why, in the food concordance, Miko made sure to note down the time of year as much as possible, because, a lot of recipes or a lot of the mentions of food in the book aren't that specific, sort of like, oh, we had ice cream. So we have to think about, okay, if this happened, and so she made a timeline as well of everything that happens in the book and what time of year it was. So we know that, say, Amy's picnic, or I don't know if it was a picnic, but, the artistic party that she had in, I think, June or July. So we're like, okay, this would be the time of year where they would probably had raspberries rather than, say, strawberries, which is a little earlier in the spring in that part of the country. Like, this is the kind of research that Miko likes to do. If it was me, I probably would have just been like, I don't know, something, fruit, it's fine. But she wanted to know exactly what it would be, right? So we really did try to do that and make things fit with the seasons as much as we could. What do you think about the omelet? I thought that, did you make it with the nutmeg like it mentions?
I added bits of nutmeg, mostly like spring onions, I think, and made it good.
Yeah, because I thought it was interesting, at least in the U.S. anyway. We don't use nutmeg a lot in savory dishes, and so
No, we don't use that a lot here either.
No,
I use it a lot on my tea, actually.
Oh, interesting. I love nutmeg.
I like to make special tea, so it's one of my
best. Oh, that's fun. Yeah. So I really actually enjoyed using the more savory nutmeg. I liked it in the omelet, and I think like it says in the note, it's sort of like almost like a different kind of pepper or something like that. But it seemed like at the time they used it a lot more than we do now. Yeah, which is interesting. I'm not sure, why that is, that it kind of fell out of favor a little bit. It's not that common of an ingredient here, I would say, nowadays. Mostly you use it for baking. And even so, it's still not super common. Like I would say, a lot of people probably don't have nutmeg in their kitchen, or if they do, they don't have fresh nutmeg. This was actually one of the major like disagreements that Miko and I had during writing the book, which they were not a lot actually, but one of them was we had a big argument about whether we should specify freshly grated nutmeg or not, because I thought that it tastes a lot better if it's fresh, and she was like, nobody has fresh nutmeg. You're just a weird cook person, you know? So I think it depended on which recipe it was, and there was one that. So I think there was one where, because it was like nutmeg cookies, I think we wrote in the recipe that, fresh nutmeg is better here, but if you have ground, that's okay.
Ice cream was not really that common back then. I don't think so. And, it's first time when Anne eats ice cream and she meets Diana in the party. I just reread the book.
That's right. Yes, is this when, where with Aunt Josephine or something like that, I must say.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like a fancy occasion thing. And, rich people could have ice cream because, you have to have the cooling and the ice and everything like that, right? In Little Women, the first time they have ice cream is when, it's actually right in the beginning of the book, when at Christmas time, when they give up their Christmas breakfast, and then Mr. Lawrence sends them over some ice cream. 2 types of ice cream, pink and white. Yeah, so that's something, he's of course much richer than they are, even though he just lives next door. And so they, this is kind of like a huge treat for them. And I think the only other time that they have ice cream is at Amy's fancy party that she tries to have. So
yeah, I think so.
And that's, quite a few years later. It's probably like 10 years later. So maybe by that time, ice cream was a little easier to get a hold of. But, people did have ice houses and things like that. So you probably wouldn't have stored ice cream, right? But you could make ice cream if you had an ice cream maker, if you have some ice, you would be able to freeze it and then just eat it right then. You wouldn't really have a way to keep it frozen though, probably. But yeah, and those pink and white ice creams, those were another one of my favorite recipes that we did. I think the pink ice cream was currant flavored, and then the white ice cream is rose and almond, which was a combination that I felt was just like a time travel. You tasted that and you were like, this is not something that we eat nowadays. This flavor I've never encountered before, right? That was really cool.
And I need to try that when the weather gets hotter here.
Yeah. Yeah, this time of year it's a little in between weather. We always get a lot of clouds in June in San Diego, but yeah, you could even recreate that ice cream flavor yourself. You don't even have to make all the ice cream from scratch, but if you have like a plain, just sweet cream kind of ice cream, or even vanilla probably, even though that's another flavor, but that mixture of almond and rose flavor I just thought was so interesting and different.
Another thing I was thinking when the curry lamb with tofu.
Right.
I was wondering when did the spices arrive?
Right. So I'm not exactly sure. I mean, of course, they've had spices coming over from, the Middle East and so on, for centuries by this time. But I think the trade with India really was where that became much more common. So to be honest, I'm not quite sure of all of the history of, when exactly that started. But I think, it would have been fairly recent at the time. I mean, it starts in, around early 1860s, I think, is when the book happens. But by the time that Meg is grown up and married, of course, it's probably later. It's like the 1870s, I would guess. So they were probably having these kinds of spices since, I would say, the first half of the 1900s. I'm sorry, the 1800s. I always get those confused. The 18th century versus the 19th century. So the first half of the 19th century, I would guess, is when these kinds of spices became more popular, probably first over in England because they were the ones who were colonizing India, but then, came over with the trade over here. So, yeah, I think this is one of those things that we think about is, you imagine that food from the Victorian era is all really bland and it's just like boiling things. But actually, they had a lot of different spices and condiments. Like they had all these different kinds of ketchup, which were really, strongly flavored and sharp, flavors. Yeah. So this kind of thing was not like unusual particularly. I think it would have been like a little bit out there, like, oh, this is an exciting, fancy recipe to try. But, it's in the Young Housekeeper's Friend cookbook, which is a very sort of middle of the road cookbook for the time. It's just for, young women just starting out in their domestic bliss or not, depending. like, the way that it's written in the cookbook, it doesn't, mention it being like a strange food. Let me see if I actually have it here. It was certainly something that people were eating at the time.
It was interesting to try that.
I don't know for sure that what they used for curry powder was the same that we have today. And of course, I mean, there are in actual India, of course, there's many, many different curry spices and spice blends and so on. But in America, what we have as curry powder is kind of a general, people would kind of know what that flavor is, right?
Hard to say.
Yeah.
It was a nice experience.
Good. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
My vegan lamb chops.
Yeah, I guess they probably wouldn't have had tofu to be. Weren't the Alcotts kind of vegetarians at one point or something?
During the Fruitlands era, I think they were.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that would have been pretty difficult at that time. I don't know where they got the protein.
Yeah, see, that's the thing.
That's the thing.
So it would have been easy for them to avoid having meat in things because you basically made everything from scratch. But like you say, where would they be getting the protein other than dairy? I don't know. Beans, I suppose.
You should eat lots of nuts and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I don't know if they knew that at the time either.
Their time in Fruitlands, it was only like 1 or 2 years, so it wasn't that long.
Mm-hmm.
Long
yeah,
time.
It didn't sound like anyone was having very much fun at that point.
Yeah, it wasn't just the meat that they couldn't eat. It was also tea and coffee and bunch of things. It would be hard for me to give up.
Yeah, for sure.
One of my friends asked me recently, like, is it easy to be a vegetarian since I've been a vegetarian since I've been 15? And when I was 15, it was really hard here in Finland because no one else was a vegetarian.
Right.
And it's so different now because we get tofu all the time and all kinds of vegan products. So it's really easy now, but it was such a nightmare back then.
I bet. Yeah.
I do feel for the Fruitland times. If it was difficult for me in the 90s, not in the 90s, like early 2000s.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm sure even more people would have just been completely bewildered by this idea,
Yeah. But good thing is that I learned to cook myself because of that.
Well, there you go.
With my own food. Today we are going to read the chapter 28 from Little Woman, which is known as Domestic Experiences. I read this again now for this podcast, and this was such a fun chapter.
Yeah. We have several extended quotations from this chapter in our cookbook as well, because this is like,
yes,
it's a
foodie chapter.
Very foodie chapter, yes. And it's so important also plot-wise, But one of our chapters is called Domestic Experiences from the Dovecote because of this chapter.
All right. Would you like to read the first paragraph?
Sure. Like most other young matrons, Meg began her married life with the determination to be a model housekeeper. John should find home a paradise. He should always see a smiling face, should fare sumptuously every day, and never know the loss of a button. She brought so much love, energy, and cheerfulness to the work that she could not but succeed, in spite of some obstacles. Her paradise was not a tranquil one, for the little woman fussed, was over-anxious to please, and bustled about like a true Martha, cumbered with many cares. She was too tired sometimes even to smile. John grew dyspeptic after a course of dainty dishes, and ungratefully demanded plain fare. As for buttons, she soon learned to wonder where they went, to shake her head over the carelessness of men, and to threaten to make him sew them on himself, and then see if his work would stand impatient tugs and clumsy fingers any better than hers.
They haven't been married very long time, and this chapter happens.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for a year, something like that.
Right, and they're realizing, the honeymoon glow has worn off a bit, even though they were still very happy. And, as she said, even after they discovered they couldn't live on love alone, John did not find Meg's beauty diminished, even though she beamed at him from behind the family coffee pot.
Oh.
Yeah, she was very sweet. They're they're sort of playing house, right? At least they start out, they're playing house and they're just like, oh, this is so fun. Look, here we are buying vegetables. Here we are, making coffee in the morning. Here we are, I am sweeping the floor of my own house. Isn't this delightful, right? And then after a while, it kind of, wears off. Like his job is very long hours. He's really tired. And now she has to do all this heavy housework by herself. That's not like, running around with your sisters and like, putting on plays in the attic anymore. Like this is like, oh, I'm responsible for this whole thing, right? And of course it's Meg. So she wants to do everything right and in the most beautiful possible way, right?
That's the thing about Meg. I think she was always very demanding of herself. She wants to be the perfect housewife, and then she wants to be the perfect mother. And that's going to lead into a burnout at some point.
Yes, exactly. Because it's never possible to be perfect no matter what. And and she has incredibly high standards. Forgiving of others, really. But for herself, she's like, no, I have to be the model.
I was thinking about this, but thought about like a true Martha. I don't know. Do you have like organization in America called Marthas?
No, we don't. I don't think so anyway.
Because we have one here in Finland. It's like started in 1899 or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a women's household organization.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
And they make like cooking classes and
yeah, in my my which makes sense because here in my annotated edition it says that this is a reference to the Bible where there is this these two sisters, Mary and Martha, and I guess Martha is always, it says here, she is cumbered about much serving, like it says here in Little Women, cumbered with many cares. So she's annoyed that her sister isn't helping her. Martha asks Jesus to tell Mary to her sister, and Jesus replies, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that good part which shall not be taken away from her, which I feel like is a little unfair of Jesus, to be honest, where he's saying, Mary is sitting here listening to my teachings, and you're busy with all of these household things. You should just, give that up and come and listen to me as well. But, if Martha doesn't take care of the house, like who else is going to, right? But I think because of this story, this idea of like a Martha, this homebody sort of person who's always doing the domestic work. So that makes sense that the organization would be called that.
Yeah, I just read about it. It was named after the biblical character. Probably during that time, they did wanted women to learn household skills,
right?
Stuff, because I think the organization has a bit of a two-sworded reputation these days because they kind of all read traditional values and stuff. Such. And then others are like, no, it's good to have traditional values and people learn.
Right. The sort of different waves of feminism in a way, where there's this sort of like, we need to reject all of the traditionally female things and let's try to do men things, right? And then now I think that, a lot of women have kind of achieved this sort of, being able to some extent sort of divorce themselves from like the home, right? I think maybe it's time for men to now be able to embrace these traditionally female things and like, learning to keep house and to, cook and clean and make your space pleasant is something that, everyone should know how to do, right? And hopefully, having an organization like that, I think is a good thing as long as it's not just only women that do it, right? And that's the sort of my hope for the future is that we can allow men to embrace female things and just have like people things, and we can all do them together, hopefully.
That's one of the reasons why I love Little Woman, because if we think about, like, for example, parenting Little Woman, that is not only seen as the woman's job because the men are very active in participating. John especially, Freddie, of course, and even Laurie. So that's why I really like Little Woman. It really mixes things up a lot.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, and and I think a lot of the the advice that is given in this chapter and some of, and I think maybe the one after where, mommy is giving Meg some sort of marriage advice. And I think a lot of it is really still so applicable of this. Well, I mean, this situation too, of sort of, okay, we have to figure out how we can live together and how, what our roles are in our home and like, what are we both contributing to the relationship, whatever that is, and of course, in this case, it's very sort of traditional, she does all the cooking and cleaning and things, and he goes out and works, right? But the way she talks about how to sort of resolve their argument and later on where she, once they have kids, she's telling Meg, don't subsume yourself into the kids and just like become the only expert on them and shut John out of this. He needs to become part of that team and you all need to work together and also have other interests outside of just your children and your home. I think all of that is things that still happen to people nowadays. Like personally, I'm not married and I don't have any children, so I can't speak to it in my own relationships, but I definitely, see a lot of other people that I know have these same issues now, 150 years later. So
that's true. All right. They were very happy, even after they discovered that they couldn't live on love alone. John did not find Meg's beauty diminished, though she beamed at him from behind the familiar coffee pot. Nor did Meg miss any of the romance from the daily parting. When her husband followed up his kiss with the tender inquiry, "Shall I send home veal or mutton for dinner, darling?" The little house ceased to be a glorified bower, but it became a home, and the young couple soon felt that it was a change for the better. At first they played keep house and frolicked over it like children. Then John took steady leave for business, feeling the cares of the head of family upon his shoulders, and Meg laid by her cambric wrappers, put on a big apron, and fell to work, as before said, with more energy than discretion. While the cooking mania lasted, she went through Mrs. Cornelius' recipe book as if it was a mathematical exercise, working out the problems with patience and care. Sometimes her family were invited in to help eat up a too plenteous feast of successes. Or Lottie would be privately dispatched with a batch of failures, which were to be concealed from all eyes in the convenient stomachs of the Wilhelmus. An evening with John over the account books usually produced a temporary lull in the culinary enthusiasm, and a frugal fit would ensue during which the poor man was put through a course of bread pudding, hash, and warmed over coffee, which tried his soul, although he bore it with a praiseworthy fortitude. Before the golden mean was found, however, Meg added to her domestic possessions what young couples seldom get on long without: a family jar. Did you read this recipe book from Mrs. Cornelius?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is the only actual cookbook that's mentioned in Little Women. This was actually the foundation of many of the recipes in our book. I would say probably the majority of them, because we used a lot of different historical cookbooks in our research. But this one was the one that we found was really the best one. I mean, all the recipes would come out well, even the ones that sounded really weird. It has good instructions for the time period. It has actually much more detail about how to cook things. A lot of the recipes of that time period are just very, very basic, and you kind of have to read between the lines and try to figure out actually what they're doing. But this one, Mrs. Cornelius actually lived in Andover, Massachusetts, which is not far from where the Alcotts lived in Concord. I kind of wonder, if this is actually a cookbook that she actually used herself in the Louisa and her family actually used. They may have even possibly known Mrs. Cornelius. It was published in 1846, so it's quite possible.
That's really cool.
And but it was, it was a very popular book at the time. Kind of like, we have The Joy of Cooking is kind of a similar idea for, people who are a little bit new to the kitchen, and gives a lot of instructions about various things, not to mention, some various sort of moralizing about how, it's superior to make your own bread and all of that kind of thing. She mentions in the preface, she says, I have seen many a young lady just entered upon the duties of married life, perplexed and prematurely careworn for want of experience or a little good instruction in regard to the simplest domestic processes, and often have felt with the sincerest sympathy and earnest wish to render her some effectual aid. So this is basically exactly Meg. Somebody who's just married, they're trying to figure out, like, how do I do all of this stuff, right? And a lot of the cookbooks of the day were written for people who already knew how to cook. The instructions were very minimal. And so this one really is trying to give you all of the things that you need to know to run a household. And it has recipes for sort of medicine type things for taking out stains, directions for washing, all kinds of stuff. So it's really kind of an amazing book. But actually, this is a book that now, after having done this, I actually consult and cook from in my everyday life sometimes because the recipes are great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if this has happened to you. Like maybe a few years ago, I was reading Undine and Sintram, which is a book that Joe wants as a Christmas gift in the chapter
That's
1.
fun. Yeah, and I've always kind of just passed over that, being like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I was reading that, and then I had this moment of realization. I was like, wow, Louisa May Alcott read this like 150 years ago. And then I had to take like maybe 15 minutes and like let that sink in. And it was a weird feeling.
It is, right? That this little cookbook that I have, it's the same one that maybe she cooked from. Yeah. Yeah, it's wild to think about.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the idea that we have about cooking these historical recipes and trying to make them as accurate as possible, even though, maybe some of them seem a little complicated or strange. Like we want to have that time travel experience, right? And try to eat these things like they ate them then and cook them like they cooked them, and try to get that window into the past that way.
At least for me, when I've been reading these books, that I know that the Alcott sisters, right? It deepens my connection with Little Woman a lot. Yeah. And I think the cooking will do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just reading this passage, I'm like, I've made that bread pudding. I made the hash. I know what that is now, which I didn't before. Hash at that time was different than what we think of as hash today. And if I hadn't done this research, I wouldn't know that. I'd be thinking that he's eating like some sort of like fried potato thing. And it's actually more like meat and gravy over toast, So charming how Meg decides to cook everything in the cookbook as if it's a mathematical exercise.
Yes.
It's really charming. She tries so hard.
She's adorable.
And you also notice how she invites her family over for her successful meals, right? But the failure, she's just like, let's just take this over to the Hummels. Nobody needs to know. Yeah, she even to her, like, if it was Joe, she would totally invite the family over and be like, oh my God, look at this thing I made. It's ridiculous, right? And she wouldn't care if people knew about her failures, but Meg is like, no, I have to keep up this facade all the time.
Oh, yeah. Some lovely personality differences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I love both girls very much, but like they have their differences.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Fired with a housewifely wish to see her storeroom stocked with homemade preserves, she undertook to put up her own currant jelly. John was requested to order home a dozen or so of little pots and an extra quantity of sugar, for their own currants were ripe and were to be attended to at once. As John firmly believed that my wife was equal to anything and took a natural pride in her skill, he resolved that she should be gratified, and their only crop of fruit laid by in a most pleasing form for winter use. Home came 4 dozen delightful little pots, half a barrel of sugar, and a small boy to pick the currants for her. With her pretty hair tucked into a little cap, arms bared to the elbow, and a checked apron which had a coquettish look in spite of the bib, the young housewife fell to work, feeling no doubts about her success, for hadn't she seen Hannah do it hundreds of times? The array of pots rather amazed her at first, but John was so fond of jelly, and the nice little jars would look so well on the top shelf, that Meg resolved to fill them all, and spent a long day picking, boiling, straining, and fussing over her jelly. She did her best. She asked advice of Mrs. Cornelius. She racked her brain to remember what Hannah did that she had left undone. She reboiled, resugared, and restrained. But the dreadful stuff wouldn't gel. She longed to run home, bib and all, and ask Mother to lend a hand, but John and she had agreed that they would never annoy anyone with their private worries, experiments, or quarrels. They had laughed over that last word as if the idea it suggested was the most preposterous one, but they had held to their resolve, and whenever they could get on without help, they did so, and no one interfered. For Mrs. March had advised the plan. So Meg wrestled alone with the refractory sweetmeats all that hot summer day, and at 5 o'clock sat down in her topsy-turvy kitchen, wrung her bedaubed hands, lifted up her voice, and wept.
Oh, poor thing.
Like, no. And he brought like 4 dozen jars of, like, that's so many jars of jam. Like, and, and this is one of those, making jelly for the first time, very difficult. And it says right here, like, she reboiled it, resugared it, restrained it. Like, all of this is what you don't want to do, according to Mrs. Cornelius. Like, once you've been boiling the jam, you should never, like, stop and start again, because apparently that will make it not gel. So right here, we know what she did wrong. But how would she know? She's a little too cowed to ask Hannah for advice, right? And she's just, we've all been there, where you're just, like, spent so long working on this thing, and it just won't come out, and, that.
I haven't never done Jello, but when I was younger, I did lots of like currant juice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I could still do that out from memory because I used to do that so many times. But like, she's taking a huge task because she hasn't done Jello before, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And at least she has the little boy to help her, like, pick the stems off of the currants. Yep. Yeah. When we made this, currants are not common in the U.S. in general, and especially not in Southern California. So we had to, like, find a specialty fruit store that had them, and they were super expensive. We did not make 4 dozen jars at all. But yeah, and then you have to, like, pick the little stems off, get all the juice out. Making jelly is actually not super difficult as long as you kind of know what to look for, but it's one of those things, like, you need a little experience to make sure that the textures are right and everything. So we tried to explain it as well as possible in the cookbook. We'll see. But the nice thing about jelly, though, is it's just equal weight of juice and sugar. You can just kind of, however much you end up with when you juice your fruit, and you just add that much sugar and go ahead and boil it. And then, but getting to that right texture, that's the difficult part. Yeah, poor Meg.
Yeah, I might try that someday. It's not so much to get currants here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was really delicious. It was. And then once you have the currant jelly, you can use it to make the currant ice cream.
Nice. I was just thinking about, I think I should do some recipes on your blog and Green Gables as well. Try them out. Because I love Anne of Green Gables. And I was just thinking, like, currants, because one of my early childhood memories was playing in my grandmother's garden, and she had, like, tons of currant bushes.
Oh, cool.
Tons and tons and tons of them. And then I would read Anne of Green Gables and Little Woman.
Right? Make them currant wine.
Yes, good memories. But, like, when I think about currants, I always think about my grandma, and when I think about my grandma, I think about Anne of Green Gables and Little Woman. It's a nice mixture.
Did she read those too?
She did read, I don't know if she read Little Woman, but she did read Anne of Green Gables. She was a very positive person. A regular mortal.
Oh.
Another thing that I liked about your blog is that there were all these recipes from Pippi Longstockings.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking that I should rewatch the 70s Pippi Longstocking series.
Seen that since I was a kid myself.
I have the DVD box. I got it last year. It's very nostalgic.
Oh, that's fun.
But like, we can get lots of Swedish foods here if we want to, so those are pretty easy for me to make.
Pudding was really delicious, I remember.
Oh.
And Mom and I are planning to have a sort of midsummer party this year. So we are going to try to make some Swedish dishes for that. So I was thinking I would recreate some of those because some of our family is Swedish, the name
I
Bergstrom.
thought about the last name, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's on my grandfather's side. Yeah.
Yeah, we also have the summer solstice here in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. A sort of like celebration for that, or?
Well, in Finland, we usually have bonfires and then people get drunk if they like to.
That's pretty good.
It's a big drinking party. And then if you're like me and you like more traditional stuff, then you can make spells and all kinds of fun stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Do they come true? That's debatable, but they're a really fun thing to do anyway. I do like the bonfires. They're really nice bonfires.
Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, maybe we'll have one too. My mom has a fire pit outdoors, so yeah, I think it's a fun thing. We don't generally do anything particular to celebrate the solstice here, so I thought it would be fun to sort of like, my family doesn't really have any Swedish traditions left. Again, they came over such a long time ago. But I thought that might be a fun one to sort of revive a little bit.
Yeah, it sounds nice. You can make your own traditions.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I always feel very nostalgic when I watch Pippi Longstockings. I used to love that show as a child and the book as well.
Yeah, it makes me think of my grandmother actually, because when I would go visit her, those were some of the books that she had at her house that probably belonged to my dad and his brothers and sisters. So those were ones I would always read when I was there.
So the people who like to read, the bookish people who listen to this, you can go to Jenny's and Miko's blog and find bookish foods.
Yes.
The advertisement.
Yes, 36eggs.com. The number 3, the number 6 eggs. And 36 eggs is in fact Anne of Green Gables reference.
Oh yeah, I read that recipe there.
Did you? That was such a fun thing. Oh my gosh. So for those who are not familiar with some of the deeper cuts of the Anne of Green Gables universe, the fourth book, Anne of Windy Poplars, in it there's a fancy family called the Pringles, and they have a famous recipe for a pound cake that has 36 eggs. And so we decided to try to recreate this pound cake, and we had to do a lot of research and get a lot of interesting special equipment, and the cake weighed like 9 pounds, but was eventually delicious after a lot of work.
It's like a mythical cake in the book. It's really funny when they speak about it.
Yeah, and when they finally get the recipe, the housekeeper is like, 36 eggs? Like, are you crazy?
Jenny and I continue our discussion next time. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and make good choices. Bye.